Good evening. I'm currently a master's student at the University of Birmingham, but I also work part-time at my local supermarket. During my shifts, I encounter quite a lot of customers. Therefore, I'm wondering why Germany has mustered over 500,000 tests per week, whereas we've only managed 5,000 to 8,000 per day. Why does the panel think this has happened?
Well, Matt, you were talking about this in the press conference earlier on today. Why have we lagged behind? Why have we taken so long to get even as far as we have?
Well, we've got one of the biggest testing programmes in Europe, but there are places like Germany where they have been able to do more tests because they started with a huge diagnostics industry, which is just not the thing that we've had traditionally as a country. They've been the European centre of diagnostics, started with over 100 labs in Germany. But none of that takes away from the absolutely accurate point, which is that we want more testing. I mean, of course, I understand why people want the certainty that you get from having a test. So we're ramping up testing. We've hit the goal of having 10,000 tests a day by the end of March. And today I've set the goal of 100,000 tests a day by the end of this month. And to do that...
Can I just be clear, because I didn't quite understand that in the press conference, because there was a talk of 25,000 by the end of the month and 100,000 by the end of the month. Which is it?
100,000 by the end of the month.
And that's to test if people have coronavirus at the moment?
The goal was 25,000, and by having pulling together a national effort, I think we can get to 100,000. So that's the goal I've set today, and you know, the whole pharmaceutical industry is going to have to help and play its part in the same way that we've got manufacturers, expert manufacturers who've never manufactured a ventilator before, now manufacturing ventilators. The pharmaceutical industry that normally deals in other types of drugs like vaccines and what have you, they are joining this national effort to get enough testing. So we do test more. We've tested more than France, the Netherlands, lots of other similar countries, but there are countries like Germany that are ahead of us. And I think that we've got to increase the amount of testing, and that's important. So that's what we're going to have to do.
So just to be clear, the aim is 100,000 by the end of this month to test people if they have coronavirus, not if they've had it, but if they actually have it at the time of taking the test.
It's 100,000 tests overall. As you say, there are two different types of tests.
So it's 100,000 for both types of tests?
Exactly, on all the different strands of testing policy. We have 5 different strands. I won't go through the details of it, but you're right that essentially there are two types. There's either the test, the swab test to see if you've got it, or a blood test to see if you have had it. But the latter, the science isn't yet developed enough for those tests to be in large scale good enough not to give false results, which is worse than having no test at all because it gives false comfort.
And so, just so I'm clear, the 25,000 tests by the end of April is to see if people have the symptoms. If people actually have it.
That was the old goal, right? The policy is really clear. It is that by the end of this month, we are going to have 100,000 tests per day. That is what we need to do as a country.
To test if people have got coronavirus and if they have had it.
The whole lot.
Both types of tests. OK, I've got that clear. Yvette?
So I strongly welcome the measures that Matt has announced today. I think having this sort of strong commitment to broadening the number of organisations that are involved in doing the testing, you know, the universities, the private sector, the charitable sector, all of that. I think that is really good. That's really important. If we're honest, this has been hugely frustrating, the whole process up to now and the concern, the confusion about the testing. But actually to have that commitment to broaden it out is really welcome, because I think that the centralised approach and just using PHE, they're doing a great job, but it is just not enough to do the scale of the tests that we clearly need. But I still have, I mean, obviously, look, there are questions about, you know, how and why we got to here and when and so on, but put those aside, because the important thing is where we go now. I still have a big question about the overall objective with this and how this testing fits into the wider strategy, because I'm not sure what your plan is around the community testing. Is the community testing just going to be the antibodies that have you had it, are you now immune? And is it an immunity test for the community? Or is the community testing strategy about whether people are infectious? The kind of South Korea strategy, testing people, tracing the contacts and so on, which the WHO has always called for. And there's been this whole debate in Britain about really whether the government's strategy was immunity or whether it was suppression, and it's never really been clear to us. And I'm still not clear with this testing strategy whether you're pursuing immunity or whether you're pursuing suppression as the ultimate objective.
We're really clear. We are bending the curve down. So, if you like, if you call it what you will, it is about getting the curve of the virus down to slow the spread. It is not about trying to achieve immunity of the whole population. It's about trying to get the curve down and protect lives. And to do that, you need both types of tests, exactly as you say. You need both the tests to test if people have had it and therefore that they're likely to be immune, like hopefully I am. But to get lots of those, people keep trying to sell me these tests, like pregnancy-type tests. We keep checking whether they work, and so far we haven't found one that works. And then also ramping up the so-called swab test, swab up your nose to find out if you currently have the virus. Both of those are very important.
So will you do actually the community testing of the current infection? Are you planning to increase the tracing and so on as well? Because I understand the flattening the curve, absolutely right. Everybody wants to make sure that the NHS can cope. And, they are really heroes dealing with this at the moment. But in terms of how we come out of the lockdown, how we come through this, is it by getting more people to have had it, which seemed to be the government's strategy at the beginning, which was obviously worrying, or is it by getting to a point where we can do proper community testing and tracing? And if it's the second, which I hope it is, that's great.
Yes. This is like a select committee, Fiona. You don't need to be here.
But I'm trying to find, because these are the questions I thought, we were all trying to get the answer to earlier. If you get that level of community testing and tracing for infection, don't you need to go way, way beyond the 100,000 that you're talking about at the moment? Shouldn't we be setting a much bigger objective, even if we can't get there in a month?
Yes, we have a goal of 250,000, but I wanted to put a time frame on it, and I wanted to say to my team, to the team at Public Health England, who've been brilliant on this, to the NHS and to the life sciences industry and the companies involved and the charity, all the rest of them, this is our collective goal. Put a date on it, put a number on it. I'm the one I put that there. I've said that this is our goal, and we've now got to make it happen. And just there is one further short, really important point in this, which is that, of course, getting to broad community testing is important and is the goal. But we have to prioritise the tests that we've got, starting with the patients for whom it can be a life or death matter, then the critical NHS staff, then key workers, and once we've got enough tests for all of them, we can then get to the community.
Well, on that point, Donna, yes, I was going to say, let's hear from you.
It's important to remember that people coming into the hospital come in for the community. So there is COVID-19 in the community. So we do have to test the community, because it's not just existing in a hospital. And if you look across from Ireland, many of the people that are getting COVID-19 are in the community. So one of the things that you and I know is it's important that if your child's got a cough, you understand, or you've got a cough, you understand what it is, because nor do you want to be a spreader, or nor do you want to self-isolate for 14 days unless you know that you've got it. So it's hugely important, and we are going to have to ramp up the tests across the community. We have focused in the hospitals because we know it's a place where it's spreading, but equally we know that 1 in 10 workers from healthcare workers are also people that are spreading the virus. So we need the tests both in the community and in hospitals.
And Donna, I noticed that Matt, you wouldn't commit to saying when health workers would get the coronavirus test that they required, as many as they felt they needed in order to be able to see if they'd got symptoms, if they were infectious or not, whether they could come back to work. What's your feeling about that, Donna?
Well, we have to get it, because if we don't get it, we won't be able to work. So what we know is, although the figures are getting better from this evening's press conference, we know that at any one time between 25 and 40% of our healthcare workers are self-isolating. So we've got
So
some
how does
hospitals...
that tally with the figure that you gave at the press conference?
It's a bit
then
better than that.
What did you say, Matt? You said something like
5.7% of doctors and 8% of all NHS staff.
Because on Monday we were told it was 25%.
Yeah, but that survey was not an accurate survey, so I wanted to get that figure and explain it to the public because, you know, 8% is still it's much lower than people had previously reported, but it's still a high figure, and this is why Donna is completely right about the need for the testing within the NHS, and then once we've got to that, then we can keep the numbers going up and keep expanding.
Let me just, John, I want to come to you in a minute. I'm just going to read out some of the tweets that we're getting in, or the comments we're getting in. Bev Hope, would you agree that you were slow off the mark? This is obviously addressed to you, Matt. You knew this was coming, yet testing and ventilators requested at a late stage. Isn't part of the problem, says Brian Russell. We started on the wrong track with herd mentality and then changed, I think it means herd immunity, and then changed track. This meant we were at the back of the queue for buying tests. Someone who refers to themselves only as JC. What is the blocker to getting to 100,000 tests per day right now? Is it money, lack of testing kits? I mean, John, you're listening to this. What's your view?
First of all, I want to begin by praising the NHS staff. And in my book, they should get the tests. There should be a priority, just like the patients, because they are putting their lives in great danger, and because of their calling and because of their vocation, nevertheless, they still go. So I would have thought the priority should have been really the patients and all those who are on the front line of doing it, plus those who are doing social care. I think the testing should happen. And in the end, I don't think that the government actually could have prepared better. This is almost like a family bereavement. You can do your best, but when it happens, it hits you pretty hard. It's almost like having an earthquake. You can prepare as much as you like, but until it happens, it becomes very difficult. What the government, I think, hasn't done is to do what Kitchener did. Your country needs you. So would have galvanized all our industries, everything that they've got. You're coming to it slightly late. I mean, when you had, for example, Formula One, Mercedes-Benz saying they are capable of producing breathing equipment, they can produce 1,000 a day. There are many other companies that actually could, without relying on things coming from overseas, do so. You need now to galvanize all the industries and all the scientists and everybody else and say, we are at a war with this invisible danger, and therefore we want you to do everything that you can do. And so for the rest of us who are not in the front line, we need to do exactly what you said, staying at home, protecting the NHS and children, and then save lives. This is what we could do, but collectively, this country could manufacture some of all that stuff pretty fast, pretty quickly, if all the industries were invited to come at the table. So I think you come to it a bit late. You should have really done it. And for the things you've done so far, I just want to say some of them, particularly that you gave the responsibility to science. I think that was a good thing to do, but you didn't involve all the scientists that needed to come, and it would have already, I think, had more personal protection equipment much faster, because in this country, those things can be manufactured very quickly and very fast. And then the police, or rather the army, should have found somebody who's good in logistics, who really has been good in a battle war to distribute things, to be in charge of it, and not just the health professionals, because their role is to heal, is to support, is to encourage. Have you found a great brigadier or a major commanding the distribution of all of this, and not just relying on haphazard way of doing it?
I mean, Matt, just picking up on, obviously, the Brigadier...
because I agree so much. We've got Brigadier Phil Prosser, an absolutely remarkable man who is in charge of the logistical effort of getting this protective equipment out. And the Army have been brilliant in responding to this.
But do you also agree with John that you've come to this a bit late?
I think it's a bit unfair, because on the testing, for instance, we've had the private companies, the testing, the British diagnostic companies involved in this from the start. We've just had to cast the net wider and wider to get things going faster and faster. So, for instance, the universities and the university labs, they've been involved. Companies that are like Thermo Fisher, a global company, and like Randox, which is a British company, they've been involved for a long time. But I agree. But I say that to explain what we've been doing. But I agree with the Archbishop's point, which is this really is a national effort. Everybody can play their part, whether it's by staying at home or whether it's if you're in one of these industries where you can really do your bit, then by stepping up to the plate. Just one example, GlaxoSmithKline, great British business, never done any testing before in its life, but pharmaceuticals are obviously quite close to testing. Other than very briefly, it did some for the Olympics. And when I phoned them up and said, you've really got to turn your great industrial muscle to this problem, they said, how do we help? Let's do it. Let's make it happen. And that's the attitude that we need.
Yeah, but if I may still say, yes, there's some stuff you've done, and I'm not critical of, because this is something you can never prepare for. What I'm trying to say today, I heard you for the first time calling upon all industry, all universities, all labs. Why didn't you do that 2 weeks ago? That's what I'm talking about. Galvanizing together everybody, to me, was today, not 3 weeks ago.
It's funny. Literally 2 weeks ago, we did do the same call, but I obviously didn't get it to your ears. And you know what? In this great response to this virus, you just do everything you can, and when we come up with an idea, if we haven't thought of it before, I'm not going to shilly-shally about. We just get on with it. And actually, I have to say, this has been true. The response of the country as a whole has been great because, people haven't been political or picking things apart. Generally, the sense is, this is a war, as the Archbishop Sentemi just said, but it's a war in which we're all on the same side. And that changes the way that we deal with it because it means we've all got to pull together.
And I think that's completely right. I think this is something where you want the whole country pulling together, and it is why you want all of the industry, you want all of the different organisations, and everybody wants to be part of this and wants to innovate. I guess the only thing that I would add is I think that you said something really important today, Matt, when you talked about levelling with people. And I think that does also mean actually also levelling with people and being honest about things that actually maybe should have happened faster or should have been done earlier. Because a part of the reason I think that is important because it's about building trust.
Yeah.
And when you're in a pandemic, trust really, really matters. And if people think, or if NHS workers who are really on the front line of this and really struggling with, a lot of the things, the pressures that they are facing, if they lose trust and feel like they're being given a line from a press release or whatever, then that makes it much harder to build that collective thing. So, whilst I would strongly support the measures that you've announced today, I think I would probably also urge you to also be honest about the things that may have gone wrong earlier on or may not have slotted into place as fast as they should have done.
And I think the impact, if you're not honest, is we lose confidence. So, people hearing about Great Ormond Street this afternoon having a problem with its cardiac suite will lose confidence because...
And why were they having a problem?
Well, they're having a problem because there we had somebody that was infected operating, and that means that the staff will now need to self-isolate, patients will have to be tracked and contacted. So it is important that actually we do have the tests available because, I was having a debate on Newsnight the other night. Chris Hobson was saying there's only 2 tests available. So the timelines for us to get to the swabs and having them on site in the hospital need to be explicit because otherwise we lose confidence in the frontline staff lose confidence in what people are saying.
I think this transparency is really important and also being clear about some of the challenges, right? This is difficult and there will be bumps in the road. I hoped that by now these antibody tests, the blood tests, we bought a lot of them. We bought from 9 different companies and it's disappointing that the first few ones that we've run are just not high enough quality, but we've been completely upfront about the fact that we've bought them, they haven't worked, and we'll keep searching until we find one that's good enough. So.
And it probably is also fair to say there was a confusion early on about what the strategy was on the sort of immunity suppression and
Never
so
with
on.
me. Never with me. No,
Or
no,
in
not
which case there's been different views within the government, and you know that does happen. We understand that will happen sometimes, but there
do you
has been
accept that?
different,
No, I don't. I don't,
different
but
views
I
expressed
don't,
by
but
different members of the government.
I don't. I'm not going to get into the sort of the communications of it, but that is, you know, we're really clear about the strategy here. It is to save lives by flattening the curve and building the NHS capacity.